Hi, my name's Brad Young, and welcome to the Peak Performance Podcast. Today, we're going to be looking at fuel your body, elevate your game. And essentially, we're going to be talking about nutrition. We're going to be looking at how performance nutrition can help you get to the next level. I mean, because we got to up our game here, because we've already looked through so many aspects of peak progress. We've looked at our weaknesses, evaluated ourselves in so many ways, but we hadn't really dug too far into the diet. And after this episode, we're going to be looking at sugar addiction, the effects of food addiction, and things like that on your body, because we really got to work on these foundational principles before we move farther along. And so, when we think about it, performance eating is the key to achieving peak performance, because it's not about your food; it's more about fueling your ambition, your drive, and your goals. What you put in your body shapes what you're capable of achieving. You know, that's why I love Huel. Huel is a very balanced meal. I can put it with 20 ounces of water, shake it up, it keeps me full, and it really, keeps good balance there. And there's other simple ways to do it, but that gives me so many vitamins, just like, a drink in the morning. I have it, and we have greens, reds, all kind, amino acids, and all kinds of other things in there. Include collagen, things like that. There's just so many things that I could name everything, mushrooms, etc. So there's so much in there. It really makes a difference. I can tell the day by the way I perform, by the way I've eaten earlier in the day. And so we have to adjust that. We got to think about how we're going to eat, what we're going to do. And so we start looking at it from this perspective. Let's start looking at the diet of athletes. All right, elite athletes eat high protein because it helps boost muscle recovery. It helps with growth, stuff like meats, fish, eggs, plant-based proteins. They all help, but elite athletes eat a lot of high protein diets. They eat carbohydrate rich plans. And so their plans, especially if you're an endurance athlete, you got to have the energy, from whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. You got to have these things. So we start looking at elite athletes, you look at high protein, and then you want carbohydrate rich meals. People act like carbs are the enemy, but they're really not. When you're active, you need them for energy. You need to be able to keep pushing yourself, because an elite athlete's not worrying about whether they have a six pack or not, unless they are, professional bodybuilder. That's not the thing. It's about performance. And so that's why we're eating here. Elite athletes eat for performance. So you got to look at hydration strategies. Elite athletes prioritize water and electrolyte intake to maintain peak performance, and that's so true. When I'm running, especially when it's hot, you've got to plan. You've got to plan when you're getting those electrolytes, when you're getting the water in. You got to plan when you're getting sugars, when you're getting different things in. You got to plan these things to be able to continue to move, because once your hydration gets too low, obviously, you have serious health problems, but it also can create electrolytes imbalances, can create all kinds of cramps and things like that. So, we got to always remember that. And then also, look at incorporating healthy fats. Elite athletes eat, fats like avocados, nuts, seeds, olive oil, things like that for sustained energy. There's a lot packed into that avocado, and it'll keep you full. So that's one of the other thing too to think about. Well, these fats are going to keep you full. They're going to help you from getting so hungry all the time. So, as we continue on, the timing of the nutrients. You got to plan meals and snacks around the training sessions. And that's to optimize your performance and recovery, and that's what elite athletes do. And so here's a daily example. This is ballpark, but this is a good example. And remember, we do have an attachment that will be in the podcast description. You'll be able to look at to be able to configure, your needs. There's tools. There's going to be other things in there to help with this. But let's say you're an endurance athlete like a marathoner, okay? You're going to need 60 to 70% of your calories to be carbs. You need carbohydrates. You got to be able to sustain energy for a prolonged time. So, you got to be able to keep those glycogen stores filled up. You've got to keep replenishing them, because, you run out basically after an hour and a half, after 90 minutes, your glycogen stores start going down significantly. They're already, pretty low. And so, that's why everybody, you see them timing out how they're eating and drinking, things like that. And if you're, endurance athlete, 15 to 20% protein, because, you're looking at muscle recovery and repair, but your performance, your performance. You're an endurance athlete. You're not having to worry about how many calories you get. You're worried about how you perform. And then 15 to 20% of fats for long-term energy, hormonal balance, but also keep you full. That's the thing about it, is that you remember that these fats will keep you full longer. And so you have to balance these things out. So a strength athlete, like a power lifter, I mean, you're looking at 50%, 50% carbs, 40% plus protein, and then, 20 to 30% fats. Pretty balanced right there, but you'll need the carbs for the lifting sessions, and you're going to need, obviously, the protein to repair muscle. And this is for like a power lifter. Maybe, if you're a professional bodybuilder or even competing in competition, it'll be different than that. All right. You'll be on the opposite end of this. But, at the end of the day, you still got to have carbohydrates. You still need, be taking in water, et cetera. And a team sport athlete like a soccer player or basketball, I mean, you're going to need 50 to 60% carbs, 25% protein, and then 25% fats. These are all simple macros to be able to calculate, and they're going to be very close to being right, but you got to look at your own body and be able to judge how they work with you and your body and what you do. And so we look at Olympic athletes, they build meal plans around precision goals. And so, Olympic athletes are completely different. I mean, they're elite athletes, but their sports are there's so much difference versus, a football player, a basketball player, playing, these Olympic athletes, they've had to change. They have to definitely have a different type of meal plan with serious precision, because, I mean, there's a lot of things they can't even take. So they've got a big, gigantic list of supplements and things they can't even take. So, not only are they having to watch their diet real close, they got to make sure they don't accidentally take anything they shouldn't. But, they focus on hydration strategy. They look at pre-workout meals. It's going to be obviously carbs and moderate amount of protein, and, and some fats. You got to, balance that out to where you're full, but you're not too full. You've got energy. And then, obviously protein and carbs to repair muscles and replenish those glycogen stores, because people don't do that. That's one thing about it. People get to trying to lose weight, doing things, and they forget to replace those glycogen stores. You got to replenish them, because if you don't, it's gonna catch up with you. And it's caught up with me a few times, and I learned. But you got the micronutrient focus as well. So you got to look at foods that are rich in vitamins and minerals to support health and immune function. So Olympic athletes have a lot, more to think about portion control. I mean, especially, when you're looking at body composition and different types of sports that they may be in, they're going to have to watch the portion control segment more than others, depending on what your sport is. And so, Olympic athlete, is going to be similar to the team sport: 50 to 60% carbs, 20% fats, 30% fats, and then 15 to 20% protein. And then, of course, make sure you have real hydration focus there. And so when we look at an example of well-known athletes and their diet regimens, Michael Phelps comes to mind, because, I mean, he won a significant amount of gold medals, and he worked so hard. And so during his peak performance area, he had around 12,000 calories a day. I mean, he would eat high carb pastas and bread, lean proteins, and fruits and vegetables. I mean, that's unbelievable. 12,000 calories a day. That's that high level of activity, though. Tom Brady has a very strict diet. He follows mostly a plant-based regimen with some lean meats and fish. He avoids processed foods, sugar, caffeine, and dairy. He prioritizes organic vegetables, whole grains, and anti-inflammatory foods to maintain peak athletic performance and longevity. And, I played a long time, so we look at people like that, you can see, how it affects them. Just like LeBron James. I mean, he spends a ridiculous amount of money a year on his body every year and his diet, but his longevity, it pays off. You got to invest in yourself, and he has a very balanced diet, and he has, spent loads and loads of money doing this, but it's worth every penny because look how long he's been able to play past other people. Look at all the people that have retired in between times. I mean, he has had a run. I mean, like you rarely see anybody play at this elite level that long, but that's where peak performance comes in your dieting. We look at supplements like omega 3s and branched chain amino acids and recovery shakes. They definitely play a big role. He likes the omega 3 fatty acids to help his inflammation. I have omega 3s myself every single day to work on inflammation, joint health, and then cognitive function. And then your BCAAs, they aid in muscle repair and reducing fatigue. And so then his recovery shakes, obviously, they contain protein, electrolytes, and carbohydrates because he's a basketball player. And so he goes through a lot of them. He burns through a lot of calories, a lot of electrolytes, and he needs that energy. And so now as we go on, we're going to look at elite military units. And this is, this is just a guesstimate. This is just a guesstimate. But, I did some research on it as well. But when we look at it, I mean, they have intense physical and mental demands. I mean, their macros are, really, they need sustained energy, optimal physical performance, and cognitive sharpness. And so, they're not getting the number 6 value meal. But, an ideal for based on their activity. I mean, you look at them, it's going to be close to that of elite athletes, but just slightly different. You're going to have around 45 to 50% of carbohydrates because of all the energy and stamina they need. Because I mean, they work out and exercise and train and do things very, very long times, and so you need that. But also you need 25% protein so they can recover and repair because they take a beating. I mean, you have to think. I mean, that is a very, very physically tasking job there when you look at it. And we're going to review all the different elite military units over the next few weeks. And we're going to go through them and look at their training schedules, and we're going to compare it to where you can look at it yourself and see, see how you compare up. I've already did the Army, basic Army test, and did the Marine physical fitness test, and then the Marine combat training test, which is a whole different level as well. So we've already done those, and we're going to get to some of the elite units here in the next few weeks. But I mean, when you think about it, I mean, the energy demand is so high. I mean, it's just so high for those special operations people. I mean, they have to have, high calorie, nutrient packed meals like the MREs have. MREs, they provide all the essential nutrients needed for energy, recovery, and survival in demanding conditions. You get a main entree, a side dish, and a snack or a dessert, maybe a beverage mix, and some condiments. That's it. I mean, and you can buy these. You can buy, from military surplus stores. You could buy MREs and try them out. And I mean, and they're very calorie dense. And I mean, and that's what they need. But hikers, campers, and all these people buy them. But I mean, this is they're very. It's worth trying. It's worth trying them, especially as you're working into your peak performance, trying to figure out dieting, and even looking at being able to utilize your MREs in different situations. But when we look at any of the elite military units, obviously they're gonna need roughly the same type of diets, and then obviously focus on hydration and electrolyte replenishment because I mean they're under extreme conditions. And so when we step back, we have to take back and we have to assess our own goals and our own body requirements. And so that information is going to be in the link. And so you're going to be able to assess your individual goals and body requirements. You're going to go through and write this stuff out. There's going to be a list of tools, meal prep apps, and then tips to be able to look at, to have, calorie calculators, meal prep apps, different things like that. That can help you as you're trying to figure out where you're at. And so, there's going to be some advice in there, for long-term success, like start with, small manageable changes, not to overwhelm yourself, obviously. Drink plenty of water, stay hydrated, prioritize whole, dense foods over processed ones, obviously, and then practice mindful eating. Because sometimes, it happens to me sometimes. I mean, I'll be, when I do go out to eat sometimes, I'll think I'm a lot hungry and that I eat a lot more than I do. And then a meal will get there. And I just can't eat all that. I need like half. And so, we don't realize how much our eating habits change over time. But in the workbook, you're going to be able to look at your basal metabolic rate. You're going to be able to calculate that. You calculate that times your height, weight, age. You're going to look at your BMI, look at your activity level, etc. And there's calculators you can get to do this, but I like to give you something that's where you can practically apply it. And so once you do that, then all you have to do is just figure out how many calories that you're going to burn per hour doing certain activities. It's like when I do my high intensity workouts, I burn 750 to 1,000 calories an hour, if not more. I mean, sometimes it's like 1,250 or more. So it's just, based on your body. And so we're going to, put the links in there. You can utilize that to, really make a big difference. I mean, it can really help you calculate these things out. And then as we continue on, like I said, we're going to go into food addiction, sugar addiction, and then we'll go into some supplements, back to some training, and we're going to do, multiple things throughout the Peak Performance Podcast because, I want to have something that's sustainable, that, that gives you value every single time you listen. Thanks and have a great day.